A man who lays the foundations for a global enterprise. It is a family history marked by bitter trials and tribulations and filled with gigantic success. It's an American dream come true. William Boeing, ace of aircraft. Boeing's premises near Seattle. About 400 passenger liners are built here every year, generating $1 billion turnover. Less than 100 years ago, it all started in a small way. In the summer of 1889, young Wilhelm Boeing had no way of knowing that one day he would be running the biggest aviation company in the world. For Wilhelm, life is like heaven on earth. 20 years ago, his father came to the USA as a German immigrant and became quite a wealthy man in just a few years.
And his father was a very fast learner. I mean, to come to this country and live here just 20-some years and be successful as he was, I find that most remarkable.
Brings it in. You want to keep your fingers here to try to make sure that it doesn't bunch up all the time.
The son admires his father very much, all his life, and sees him as his role model. Suddenly, catastrophe overtakes this perfect world.
Unfortunately, he died of influenza at the age of 41 or so, and I mean, having his father die at such an early age was certainly most difficult for the family.
For Wilhelm, life becomes even harder when his mother remarries. The boy withdraws into his own world and openly refuses to accept his stepfather.
Stepfathers and stepsons don't always mesh perfectly right off the bat, and he may have felt that this was good for young William to get a little more discipline in his life and so on. And so he was packed off to school.
Young Wilhelm Boeing, only just turned 13, is about to embark on a journey to the unknown. Since his father's death 5 years ago, the boy has become more and more of a loner. His new family sees him as a troublemaker. His mother finds no other way out but to send him away to far-off Europe. Spending time in a Swiss boarding school near Lake Geneva is meant to teach him some manners. Thousands of miles away from home, little Wilhelm is left to cope on his own.
I imagine for a young boy from Detroit, going to Switzerland at that time, it was really an undertaking. But apparently he did quite well.
Tens of thousands of people who've experienced that survived it. I think in Boeing's case, you have to wonder if it didn't make him a very sort of self-contained and stronger person. I mean, he was in Switzerland after all, having to cope with foreign culture and a foreign language, or several foreign languages, being Switzerland.
Many years later, Wilhelm Boeing finally sees the Statue of Liberty appear on the horizon again. The hard years at boarding school are over. Wilhelm, who has meanwhile become a young man, enjoys city life for a while. Then the serious side of life begins again. At his Uncle Rudy's, he gets ready to go to university. He goes to Yale, the traditional choice of the East Coast high society.
So where were you last night? Betsy again, huh?
I'm not telling.
She is pretty.
Thanks to his father's immense success, Wilhelm is a member of the upper class.
Get you for that. I'll be right out.
At the elite university, he finds a new home for the time being. After the lonely and authoritarian years at boarding school in Switzerland, one thing is clear for Wilhelm. He's an American. He signs his name as William Boeing, not like his father, Wilhelm Boeing. Hohenlimburg, near Hagen in the Sauerland. This is where William's father, Wilhelm Boeing, was born in 1846. And here, in the peaceful, idyllic place, is where he decided to emigrate to the USA. It can hardly be poverty that makes him want to move abroad. After all, Wilhelm comes from a reputable family of merchants and industrialists. Boeing expert Wilhelm Bleicher looking for clues. He hopes to discover something at an old graveyard.
The Boeings were innovators. They were market leaders in the Hohenlimburg metal industry for 4 or 5 generations.
The historian doesn't make a surprising discovery.
Hier erkennt man Wilhelm.
Here you can see the name Wilhelm Boeing. And from the dates, I'm sure this must be the gravestone of the emigrant's parents.
Der Eltern des Auswanderers haben.
They're not happy about their son Wilhelm's dreams of emigrating. His parents refuse to support him.
Der Vater gab kein Geld.
His father didn't give him any money, so he had to find it elsewhere. So the only person he could turn to was his sister. We know from American sources that he arrived in Michigan more or less penniless.
In Michigan angekommen ist.
It remains a mystery why Wilhelm Boeing set out on this hard journey at the age of just 22. He desperately needs money, so the merchant's son starts working on a farm. Wilhelm is too proud to ask his father for money, but he keeps in touch with home.
These letters explain that basically while the father in Germany was very unhappy his son suddenly departed, that friendship soon everything was fine, and some of those letters sounded just like today. Same problems. Either the weather was bad, the hunting was poor, or the taxation was too much. But it sounded just like today, practically.
Back then, Michigan was an El Dorado for timber merchants. Wilhelm, now working at a lumber mill, sees an opportunity for himself. He saves every cent. He too wants to be part of the booming industry.
Wilhelm Boeing comes at a time when there's that tremendous expansion westward. So a lot of those lumber barons move into Michigan and begin to see the need for markets to the west. And so the decline of lumbering supply in the east and then the tremendous demand for markets in the west indicate that he just very, very fortunately came at the right time to do very, very well.
The archives of the Public Library of Detroit. This is where Jeremy Killar, expert on the history of immigration in Michigan, hopes to find some answers. What was life like for Wilhelm Boeing in the New World? In an old register of addresses in Detroit, he's surprised to find the Boeing's house. As early as 1875, just 7 years after he arrived here, Wilhelm Boeing is already living in a stately house at the best address.
I think Boeing's education in Germany certainly helped him when he came to America. One, I think it gave him the insight, the intelligence probably to make relationships that were going to be rewarding. And apparently he brings skills from his family as well.
Every time he bought a piece of timber, well, he didn't have it very long. He turned around and sold it for twice as much. So they can't do that today in this country, but certainly he sure learned the secret of how to do it then.
Wilhelm Boeing is clever and doesn't just buy entire forests and log them. He also procures the mineral rights. Test blasting leads to a sensational find, taconite, a valuable iron ore.
That was a very great ore find in those days. He named horses, or other dogs, everything after taconite. And it was his lucky, sort of a lucky charm to him.
The archives of the Public Library of Detroit hold more surprises in store for the immigrants expert Jeremy Killar. He discovers old photographs of the Boeing family, a sensation.
This must be a photograph taken in Germany. This is the young Wilhelm Boeing. Oh, that's quite impressive. This helps a lot, very, very much.
1 year before graduation, Wilhelm Jr. leaves Yale University. He has a plan. He wants to find his taconite. He embarks on a steamer to take him to the other side of the continent, to the West Coast. For him, the searcher, it's yet another venture into the unknown. And it makes him recall his roots. He's still trying to follow in his father's footsteps. The man who died so young and whom he misses dearly.
Yes?
Mr. Boeing, your whiskey.
Oh, thank you. Stewart, at what time do we arrive in Grays Harbor?
Now, we arrive tomorrow morning. Is there anything else?
No, thank you. That's all.
Have a good evening.
William can hardly wait to arrive. He wants to go into the timber business, just like his father, who went from arriving as an immigrant to becoming a millionaire.
He looks so excited. It had to be exciting. It's like this, when you think of the West, it's this brave new world, and you're going out and looking forward and smiling and just anticipating some sort of great adventure.
The endless mountain forests on the west coast of the USA, on the foot of the Olympic Mountains. This is where the inexperienced William heads out to. Times have changed since his father made his fortune 30 years ago. The timber business has become a well-oiled industry. Amongst the lumber barons, you can sense a gold digger atmosphere.
It really was the Wild West, only instead of cowboys and cattle, you had timber and loggers. So there were lots of saloons, hotels, all the kind of places that lumberjacks would want to go to spend their hard-earned money. It would have been quite a shock, very, very different than what he was used to.
In many ways, it must have been very similar to Wilhelm Boeing's experiences back in Michigan when he first came over as an immigrant. I mean, for a kid who had been raised in luxury, sent to boarding schools, had gone to Yale, it must have been a shock.
At about the same time, on the east coast of the USA, thousands of miles away from William Boeing, and at first unnoticed by the world, a technical quantum leap, a revolution that would change the world, was taking place. Brothers Wilbur and Orville Wright have been studying flying devices for years. On December 17, 1903, they finally succeed in performing the first motorized flight in the history of mankind. This would soon change William Boeing's life too. In fact, in the woods of the West Coast, he manages to achieve things that nobody had thought him capable of.
Within a short period of time, he started the Greenwood Timber Company, so he had his own logging business that he had started. He also started Boeing and McCrimmon, which was a land holding company, so he would purchase land so that he could log it, and possibly for the mineral rights, but once he was done logging it, this holding company then sold the land. So he was very successful in the few years that he stayed in the Grays Harbor area. In all of his pictures, he's always well dressed. Part of that is just the time, but part of it was just who he was. You see photographs of him out in the woods, and yes, he's wearing rough clothes, heavy wool slacks, but they were always nicely made. You can tell when you look at the pictures that it's high quality material. He just always presented himself as a well-dressed, well-heeled businessman.
In 1908, William has had enough of this simple life amongst lumberjacks. He moves to Seattle, back then already a vibrant and up-and-coming city on the West Coast on Puget Sound.
He obviously really enjoyed living there. He joined the University Club, which is a club for college-educated young men. He joined the Rainier Club, which is a businessman's club in Seattle. He would later join the Yacht Club. He enjoyed all the fine things that a young man of good means in a nice city would enjoy. He bought a Packard and drove that around on the streets of Seattle and seemed to be having a good time.
Boeing is a wealthy bachelor who has achieved everything in life. But his life was about to take a new turn when he travels to California to see the first aviation show in the USA. Since the Wright brothers' spectacular motorized flight in 1903, the developments in aviation have been immense. Thousands of spectators come to see the new attractions of the flying machines. So far, flying is just an adventure for people tired of life. But William Boeing is fascinated and wants to try it himself.
And there was a French pilot by the name of Poulin who was going to give him a ride. However, unfortunately, the Wright brothers sued Poulin for infringement of patents on the controls. And he was one very mad Frenchman that he didn't like that.
It just didn't work out. Poulin ended up leaving the Los Angeles area before Boeing could get a ride in an airplane, but he obviously was very attracted to this.
Tell me about your trip to Los Angeles.
Oh, it was quite fascinating. Actually, I attended an aviation event a couple of weeks ago. It was amazing.
Fixated by the thought of flying, Boeing returns to Seattle.
I did.
His conversations keep revolving around aviation. At the elite University Club, William meets someone very important for his future life.
William Boeing?
Conrad of Westerveld.
Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you.
Heard a lot of good things about you.
Oh, all good, I hope.
Well, I hope so too.
Boeing listens up when Navy officer Conrad Westerveld enthuses about flying.
It's quite fascinating. You been up in a plane before?
Well, I studied aerodynamics at MIT, so I kind of designed those things.
Really? I'd like to talk to you more about that. You know, aviation is the future.
Yes, it is.
Westerveld was a well-educated East Coast young man who was in the U.S. Navy. He comes from a very similar background from Boeing.
Boeing finds a friend in Westerveld, and for them, there's only one topic in life: flying.
So you have these two young men, they're single, they're fairly well off, both interested in aviation, both interested in similar things. And so it was, the two of them finally got their airplane ride in Seattle.
But you see, there's only one passenger spot for a passenger, and that's on the leading edge of the left wing. And so your feet dangle down into the water practically on takeoff. He spent the afternoon taking turns with his friend, and they became more and more interested. This is 1914.
The short of it is that they looked at it and they said, we can build a better airplane. And that was the beginning of Pacific Aero Products that eventually became the Boeing Company.
A small shipyard situated on a river and ideal for building waterplanes becomes the nucleus of the Boeing Airplane Company. On June 18, 1916, William Boeing has his new plane pushed out onto the lake. He gets into the cockpit himself and is determined to perform the first flight.
Now, Father hadn't had a lot of experience. He'd had a little bit in this Martin seaplane, but that was about all he'd had. And you know, it's quite a performance to get in an airplane, brand new, that actually he and Westervelt had constructed and take off.
On Lake Union, William Boeing takes off for the very first flight. His plane bears the brand name Boeing and Westervelt. The successful maiden flight marks his ascent. The next morning, the news is out. Boeing and his plane are the talk of the nation. For the last 2 years, since 1914, World War I has been raging in Europe. For the first time in history, aircraft are deployed in battle. The war adds to the speed of technical advancements. Boeing sees the new sales opportunities for aircraft, but also a serious danger for the USA.
Boeing was not only a believer in aviation and an enthusiast, but he was also, in his way, I mean, he was a patriot, and he thought America was asleep at the switch, that the war in Europe was already showing that aviation had a role, and it was a role that was increasing almost week by week as aircraft improved and as their uses were diversified. When the war began in 1914, the American Army had 55 aircraft on its rolls. 55. I mean, Belgium had a more thriving military aircraft presence in 1914 than the United States did.
Boeing wants to wake the military up with a spectacular event.
He flew over the city and dropped fake bombs, cardboard missiles that with the message in them, you know, sort of in a sense saying, wake up. We need to be, our aviation needs to be prepared. You know, we're vulnerable. And the story goes that one of the places he dropped them was at a football game between the University of Washington and the University of California. And I've checked, and there was a game here in November when this flight took place. So I believe that part of it is, in fact, true also.
The headquarters of Boeing near Seattle, workplace of company historian Michael Lombardi. The diverse history of the company fills endless metal shelves. No one knows his way around these seemingly chaotic halls better than Lombardi. The most important document is kept in a safe, multiply insured and protected.
This is the document that Bill Boeing put together when he decided to start the company. It's a wonderful document when you're trying to examine the genius and the vision of Bill Boeing. And keeping in mind at the time, the airplane in the United States was just a curiosity. Nobody really saw a use for it. But Bill Boeing, in these articles of incorporation, put down what his business should be. And you see some amazing things, such as having airports and the ideas of, which was completely unheard of at the time, of people flying on airplanes and using the airplane for travel. It really shows the genius and the vision that Bill Boeing had.
Because of the war in Europe, William Boeing's close friend Conrad Westerfelt is asked to come to the ministry in Washington, D.C. The Navy was about to order 50 training planes in the near future. These were meant to get pilots trained for air warfare in Europe. As a result, Boeing has 2 new types of planes built at his small workshop within a very short space of time. Boeing is very keen to get this contract. All his hopes lie in the new aircraft. The planes are ready for shipment to Florida, where they will be presented to the Navy. Boeing calls his best test pilot in for a private meeting.
I've got 2 Model Cs ready to go down to Pensacola, Florida, and I want you to fly them.
I'm your man, sir. I can do it.
I know you are, but I will tell you this is going to be quite a challenge.
I've got a lot of airtime in these models. I know what I'm doing.
I know you do. That's why you got the job. But this will be completely different than what you've been doing in Seattle. There's different waves, there's different wind, weather conditions, and you'll be flying against the best in the country. And this is for a government contract. 50 planes.
50 planes.
If you can earn this contract, then the future of the company is very, very bright. I cannot express to you how important this is. This is the future of the company, and you're the man to make that change. You up for the challenge?
I can do it. Yes, sir. I'm your man.
All right.
I don't want you to worry about a thing.
So, here's to future business and ultimately future successes.
Okay.
In 1917, the USA enters into World War I. Pilots and aircraft are now needed in the war on the other side of the Atlantic. At Boeing's aircraft hangar in Seattle, there's an uneasy calm. They're waiting for the outcome of the test flights in front of the Navy Commission in Florida.
Gentlemen, I've received news from Pensacola. They say the Model C is excellent, and that we have won the commission. We're in business. Now we have to build 50 planes in a short time. I'm counting on each and every one of you. Now let's get to work.
Boeing received a contract for 50 of these Navy trainers. So it was our first government contract and the first production order that Boeing received. So this really was the beginning of the company.
The son of a German immigrant is awarded one of the sought-after contracts for planes to be used in the war against Germany. At times, Boeing's people work in 3 shifts. They must complete this order at all costs. In November 1918, when World War I is over, the nation celebrates its soldiers. In their honor, there are parades in every big city. Like all Americans, William Boeing is relieved that the killing on the battlefields in Europe has stopped. But he's anxious too. Surely, there won't be any more defense contracts in times of peace.
Boeing suffered at the end of the First World War, as all aircraft manufacturers did. It was an industry that had really not existed in any significant sense before the war. Suddenly it was called into life by the needs of the war. Boeing immediately had to lay off people.
Boeing's biggest worries come true, and the lucrative contracts stop coming in. How is he meant to keep his company from going under? Boeing, who went into the aviation business with so much passion, is suddenly faced with enormous financial difficulties.
What can I do for you, sir?
Well, sir, I've been working for you going on a year now, and yesterday I lost my job. I've got a wife and 2 little girls, and I don't know what I'll do without work.
Well, the company's hit rock bottom. I mean, the government doesn't want our planes anymore. I mean, what do you want me to do? I pay your salaries and bills with my private fortune. If I didn't do that, we'd be out of business a long time ago.
Yes, sir. Thank you anyway.
Yeah, wait. In which department do you work?
Carpentry, sir.
All right, I'll talk to your foreman.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Knowing that the business would continue sometime in the future, he wanted to hold on to his people. And the thing to remember at this time, these were very skilled craftsmen, woodworkers, seamstresses, and the engineers that he brought in. These people were hard to find, and it would be very difficult to find them again.
Boeing had 2 choices. They could collapse, and simply he could say, well, it was fun and now I'm going to do something else, or he could keep it going with money out of his own pocket.
Of his once 370 workers, Boeing can only keep 30. He puts $90,000 from his private money into the ailing business, then another $300,000. William Boeing has to come up with something. If people don't want to buy planes anymore, perhaps something else?
He had woodworkers, and he loved boating. He would try making boats, not just furniture. Let's make some boats. And they made very good, what they call them sea sleds. They were very high speed, 40 knots or better.
Of course, the racing boats are fitted with airplane engines and speed across the waters of Seattle in the test runs with deafening noise.
They built, like a dozen of them. And they sold 3 until Prohibition came in. And suddenly, whether this is in fact why or not, we don't know, but suddenly they all sold. And they sold for cash. Almost overnight, the rest of the sea sleds disappeared. So the inference has always been that somebody saw their value as bootlegging vessels to run up Puget Sound into Canada, where Prohibition was not in effect. So Boeing contributed to the bootlegging careers of many people in the area, but they were fine vessels.
Boeing keeps his company from going under by accepting even the tiniest contracts. He's hoping for better times for his aviation business.
One worker that came up to him and wanted to know if they're going to make it or not. And I think Father said, we get by this summer, we'll never look back. They got by this summer and never have to look back.
Good morning, Eddie.
Where, Mr. Boeing?
Everything ready?
Model C is ready to take off, refilled and checked. Where do we fly to?
We'll fly to Vancouver.
Where? Seriously? What do we do there?
We pick up mail.
There's a lot of storms in that area, and this time of year, the weather's not going to be that cooperative.
We'll fly right up here, right straight up the coast. We'll be in Vancouver before you know it.
Yes, sir. Let's do it.
In 1919, Boeing had a new business idea. Planes could speed up the postal service and make it more efficient. Boeing sees a new opportunity for his young company. He plans a direct flight across the Canadian border to Vancouver. When he returns to Seattle, this is a moment of triumph for William Boeing. People still admire him for this pioneering feat today. Hobby pilot and nostalgic Addison Pemberton has been passionate about the beginnings of airmail aviation ever since his youth.
It takes me 28 years to realize that dream. I spent 18 years looking for the airplane and another 8 years restoring it and now operating it. So it's a long time dream.
Addison Pemberton found the airplane wreck more than 70 years after it crashed.
It was only in operation about 5 weeks when it crashed, October 2nd, 1928. It hit a mountain in southern Oregon. The airplane was on that mountain for 72 years. It was carrying diamonds. There was a single passenger on board who was killed. The pilot survived. It wasn't discovered until the 1990s. It came to Spokane in 2000 to be restored. My steps that I get into the airplane, some of the cockpit controls are original. Those are things that the pilot was touching the day of the accident. I think I'm bringing history alive, and that's what I feel. I love feeling and experiencing what the airmail pioneers, what these commercial aviation pioneers experience, and I'm able to do that. It was, I think, the missing link in aviation history in the U.S. And I like antique aircraft because of their character, because their uniqueness. The challenge of piloting these airplanes is a bit unique. When this airplane is flying and it's away from the cities, it is 1928. Nothing marks time. If you are traveling in an antique car, you are having to travel on modern roads. When you are on an antique airplane and you are away from civilization, it's exactly as it was. So it's a time machine, truly.
In 1927, chances of lucrative business arise for Boeing and his competitors.
One of the major leaps in the business for Bill Boeing, and really put him on the national stage, was the idea that they would try to win one of the mail contracts, airmail contracts that the United States Post Office had put out for bid.
Boeing's men get started. They want to create the best airmail plane ever built. Its name is to be Model 40.
One of the key parts of winning this was building an airplane that would beat the competition.
The Model 40 becomes a groundbreaking plane, much to the envy of Boeing's competitors.
The airplane did beat the competition, and it was critical to the success of Mr. Boeing winning this contract, actually the biggest contract, which was flying mail from San Francisco to Chicago.
It was a groundbreaking plane, much to the envy of Boeing's competitors.
The airplane did beat the competition, and it was critical to the success of Mr. Boeing winning this contract, actually the biggest contract, which was flying mail from San Francisco to Chicago.
Both a moment of triumph and revolution.
It was a new concept of aviation, of blending passengers and airmail and everything together. This was the first time in this country that passengers, freight, and mail were carried on a route. This route was 2,000 miles long from San Francisco to Chicago.
Just 1 year later, Boeing is the market leader in the newly evolved mail and passenger freight industry, with a share of 30% of the American market.
The Boeing Airplane Company had some success building military planes, but nothing on the commercial side. And this airplane really established the Boeing Company as a commercial airplane company as well.
The rule was that the mail came first. And so if they had more mail, passengers got bumped. But carrying those passengers actually is what made it profitable even the first year. And that is very unusual when you start something as new as this, to have it successful the first year.
And then, William Boeing's private life takes a lucky turn too. Bertha Paschal crosses his path. Soon after, they get married. From now on, she hardly ever leaves his side. And William gives the love of his life a gift, the Taconite, a yacht called after the iron ore his father once found, and that had brought wealth to the family. Disrupting this flight of success comes Black Friday. Thousands of people lose their jobs and savings in the economic crisis. The mood swings against Boeing and the thriving airmail companies.
When the Depression happened, and then actually in some of the dark days of the Depression, the aviation industry was doing quite well, despite the Depression. So this, of course, caught the attention of politicians in Washington.
In February 1934, William Boeing is summoned to an investigating committee.
Mr. Boeing? Mr. Boeing, is it true that in 1916 you founded the Boeing Airplane Company in Seattle, Washington?
Yes, sir, that is correct.
And in 1927...
Boeing stands accused of getting the airmail contract only through secret agreements. The government cancels all the contracts. In the future, they want to nationalize the routes.
A building monopoly for your company?
Boeing desperately tries to refute this. A news magazine mentions the word Inquisition.
Sir, I did not create a monopoly, nor did I cheat anyone. I simply had the foresight to bid low and take a loss the first couple of years with a long view in mind. The only thing I am guilty of is running a successful company. That's all.
It was very unfair hearings. They weren't interested in the facts. They're more interested in the conclusion that they've arrived at before the meeting started. And so this basically was more a political vendetta.
Mr. Boeing, over here, sir.
William Boeing had a vision. Now he deeply regrets that he ever went into aviation. That's how hurt his feelings are.
All the charges were dropped, but the whole idea of being treated this way, that remembering that Bill Boeing was the epitome of a gentleman, that his word was everything. He was honest, a man of integrity, open and fair business. These are the things that he believed in. And to have that questioned was an affront to him. It affected him deeply, and he sold his interest and moved on to a private life.
William Boeing, who founded the Boeing Airplane Company 18 years prior to that and turned it into a booming business, is embittered and withdraws from the company. He spends a lot of time with Bertha on the Taconite in front of the Canadian coast.
When you look at the logbooks, you can see they spent a lot of time fishing at those areas. So it was more like a home. They would invite guests to join them. I would think it wouldn't be too different to people who go to their summer cottage with the family and exist there for the summer.
Then, in September 1956, 2 days before William Boeing's 75th birthday, everything suddenly stands still on board the Taconite.
I'm reviewing here the pilot house log of the yacht, and I'm looking at September the 28th, 1956. With sincere regret, I record the death of the owner, Mr. William E. Boeing, at 13:08 from acute thrombosis. Signed, Perth McIntyre, Master.
William Boeing. His driving force was his enthusiasm for flying. Passion, and not so much the pursuit of profit, was his road to success.